Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, and welcome to Pangolin, the conservation podcast. The show dedicated to exploring and amplifying the world's underappreciated conservation stories. The stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. Welcome back to another wonderful, amazing, incredible, brilliant, fabulous episode of our series celebrating voices and stories from the LGBTQ plus community. That's right, it's time for another episode of Pangolin Pride. And today, as part of our celebration, we are visiting the wonderful, the incredible Dublin Zoo with Andrew Mooney to discuss their conservation master plan. We talk about how this came to be, what it contains, and how it is aiming to create a complete paradigm shift within the organisation, so that it's a zoo which is leading the way in terms of not just being an enjoyable visitor experience, but also being an incredible kind of conservation kind of figurehead in the work that it does. And they're already doing so much, and there's so much more to do, and it's so exciting to talk about it, because especially with Andrew, because he is the one who kind of put a lot of this together and did the research and saw kind of and looked at other zoos and kind of saw what they were doing and kind of how these organizations can be these amazing conservation beacons. And so it's so brilliant to talk to him about this. I'm so excited. You're gonna love it. We also talk about the IUCN Centre for Species Survival, which is based at the zoo, and how the organisation is working with all kinds of groups, from the public to policymakers, to ensure that conservation is always on the agenda. On top of all that, we also discuss the need to kind of increase accessibility to the conservation space, both in terms of members of the LGBTQ plus community, but also in terms of young people who are getting into the space as well. And Andrew's the perfect person to talk to because the Conservation Master Plan has enabled more young people into the space. He also shares his journey through kind of undergrad and kind of PhD, and how he then kind of struggled during the pandemic to find certain jobs and roles and these kind of things, and like how his journey has developed and how he's got himself into the incredible position that he's in now. And so he's very open, he's very honest, and I think if you're out there and you don't know what you want to do or you don't know how to get into the space, Andrew is a wonderful, incredible person to listen to. I just can't say enough good things about him and the way he tells his story. I was inspired, so I hope you are equally inspired too. With all of that being said, thank you so much for joining us once again. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future conversations with incredible, wonderful, amazing people. And without further ado, let's get started. And welcome back to the show. I am now joined by Andrew Mooney, the Conservation and Research Officer for Dublin Zoo, and he's here to talk all about this amazing place, this organisation, and all of the fantastic work that it does. And I'm so excited to do it because, ashamedly, it's one of few zoos, I feel like, within easy travel distance for me that I have not yet been to. So I will hold my hands up now and say it. I am planning to come later this year, but I'm so excited to learn more about it and get this like context before I visit, because I'm so excited. Thank you so much for joining me today, Andrew.
No, thank you for having me, and hopefully I sell it enough for you to actually come and visit us.
I'm so excited because one of my friends, like Jody, who I do this podcast with, earlier this year, we've been kind of like, oh, where should we go? And then I think we finally decided the last time I saw her, we're like, Dublin. We're doing Dublin. We'll come in the summer. We'll do the zoo and we'll see all the other stuff. Because I've been to Dublin before, but never to the zoo, which is a big miss for me. So I'm very excited to kind of chat about it and like get to know it. And then when I come, I'll feel like a real insider and be like, oh, well, I know about this, and this. So it's going to be fantastic. But no, I'm so excited to chat. And I guess like the first thing I always like to do is like get this kind of, I introduce you there with a job title, but obviously we are far more than that. We are full people with full lives, maybe passions, things that I don't know from LinkedIn about you. So I always like to say, like, what could you introduce yourself to the listeners? Could you tell them a little bit about who you are, maybe a little bit about your job, and just kind of general introduction. Who are you?
Yeah. So, as you said, I'm the conservation research officer here at the zoo, and that is a really broad and vague title. Um, and to be honest, like every day looks completely different in that role at the zoo. So, I guess in kind of summary, I try to manage all of our conservation work and our conservation partnerships both in Ireland and around the world. Um, and then I also try to manage all the research projects that we're involved in here at the zoo, including our external work with universities and students, but then also the work we're trying to do ourselves internally as well. And then a little bit beyond that, last year we launched our IUCN Centre for Species Survival, in official collaboration with the IUCN Species Survival Commission. And I'm also acting as coordinator for that centre and that new work plan going forward. So there's a lot happening at the zoo. It's changed a lot even in the 2 years I've been here. So conservation research officer is a nice way of kind of summing it all into one, but really it's probably the most varied and diverse role I think in the zoo at the minute.
I always love whenever I ask someone on the podcast, I'm always like, "What do you do?" I always expect like you'd think eventually one day I might get like a one word kind of like I do this, but I feel like in conservation and things, it's like, oh no, I do this, and then sometimes I do this, and then I also do this, and on the weekend sometimes I have to do this as well. So like, no, that's fantastic and like really interesting, and I think like there's a lot there to I guess start to unpack and kind of chat about and kind of talk about. Um, I guess like something that it kind of something I also like to ask a little bit is that like obviously like in conservation and there are multiple careers as this series has highlighted so far. We've talked to people who do research in the field, we've talked to people who do kind of comms kind of side of kind of the work. We've talked to people who do education, and I always want like to know kind of how people get to where they are and doing this research role, but also doing this kind of role within a zoo setting as well. I think is quite interesting. So I wondered, like, how did you get to where you are now? What made you kind of want to do this kind of role, but also do it in a zoo? Like, what kind of how did you get to this point?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point for a lot of students. I think we see in universities, they're not aware these kind of positions are available. Um, I think I was very lucky from the earliest age visiting Dublin Zoo as a child. I knew I wanted to work in a zoo. 100%. There's no other career for me. I was going to work in a zoo. I thought it'd probably be a zookeeper. That's kind of what I was pushing towards. And then I looked at how you do that in Ireland, and the best way was obviously to go to university and get a degree in zoology. So I did that, and then I kind of just fell into more the conservation and research side of it. So at the end of my at the end of my undergraduate degree, I actually offered a PhD at Trinity College Dublin with my supervisor from undergraduate, and that was using data in Species 360 and ZIMS to look at population management and conservation. And I'd never really thought of progressing to PhD level until that point and looking at more of an academic or conservation role. So when I was presented with that opportunity, while also continuing to work with zoos and zoo data, it was a no-brainer, and I kind of just I jumped at it. To be honest with you, I would say the PhD was amazing. I loved it so much, but finishing in the middle of a pandemic, when no zoo was hiring and every zoo was furloughing staff left, right, and centre, was disheartening and difficult. But after the pandemic, Dublin Zoo, with our new director, Dr. Christoph Schwitzer, had this new position in conservation and research. So it kind of worked out perfectly. But I'd say I always knew going in I was going to work in a zoo. Um, I think just the sector within the zoo kind of changed.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's like that's really interesting actually, and it's something that like it's something that like I feel like a lot of people, especially if you're talking to students, right? I think we need like there's an expectation on people in high school to understand and know exactly what they want to do and be like, I'm going to do this as a job, and then you go into university and you realize actually like I love this, but maybe in a different way, or even you go to university realize the course you're doing is I actually don't really like I did international relations as my undergrad and I was doing it. I was like, this is really interesting. But the aspect of it that I enjoy is the kind of more than human, or as it's phrased in that kind of setting, or like the nature side of it, the environmental side of it. And so you kind of jump around a little bit in those things. And having that ability to change, I think, really interesting. I don't know. So you did undergrad straight into PhD. That
Yeah.
sounds I did my undergrad, then a master's, then worked for a few years, and now I'm doing a PhD. And I'm like, if undergrad Jack had had to go and do a PhD, his brain would have leaked out his ears probably within the first month. So I'm now even more impressed than I already was of like, how do you even do like, okay, like, yeah, impressive, but like challenging, I imagine, or good, like, was it fine? Like, how?
I really enjoyed my PhD. A lot of people have difficult experiences or they find it very challenging, and it is quite academically and mentally challenging in its own way. But I love the whole experience, and I actually feel that going straight from undergraduate to PhD, I was already in a mindset of I'm in an academic setting, I'm studying, I'm doing work, all of those things, and suddenly going from that into a PhD, the only thing that changed was I was suddenly getting paid to do that. Not much. You don't get paid much as a
Hmm.
PhD student, but going
Hmm.
from undergraduate where you're doing all that and still working part time somewhere else, like I was, into okay, go and do this, but also get paid for it now and just focus all your time on this one thing you love was really great for me. I will say I did have it lined up that if I didn't get the PhD, I was going to go and do a research master's. So I kind of knew I was going to go down that track anyway at some point. It just kind of all worked out time wise, and looking back now, I wouldn't actually change it at all. I don't think I needed any time out or anything like that. I think it actually might have derailed me a little bit if I took time out.
I mean, fair. And then, yeah, I guess like get it all done. Then you can go and do the practical side of like using the knowledge you gain, but also in the practical set. That yeah, that makes sense. I feel like yeah, the little taste of yeah. This is the other thing is like I'm doing my PhD and I love it, but the little taste of freedom that I got in between PhD, I'm like, but what if I just run away and don't do that? What if I like go back? Like it's a really tempting thing sometimes for people. I think.
Completely. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't appreciate as much as they should is the financial limitations that come with a PhD. Going from undergrad to PhD, as I said, was great because you're getting paid. But if you're going from a full time position and you're saying, actually, I want to go back and do a PhD somewhere, it doesn't often match up with cost of living and other financial responsibilities. So it can be a really difficult personal choice at that stage to make that sacrifice and go back. And a lot of people just can't afford to do it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's yeah. I think that's yeah. I didn't expect to talk about this, but it's really interesting because it's been on my mind a lot recently. Of like, yeah, seeing, especially because if existing in a university setting, like seeing people who are doing masters thinking about and this, that, and the next thing, and people trying to work out their things. It's really, really, it's really interesting. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of people I think listen to this who are probably at that stage of like trying to work out exactly what they're going to do or what they want to do. And I think like, yeah, I think so. An important insight to have is this like yeah, your path is not defined from the moment you leave school. And also the path is different for everybody, I think is a really important thing to kind of highlight in these kind of academic things, especially because like, yeah, academia, if you're not nailing it, can sometimes feel like you're an absolute mess and failure, even though you're like, no, this is actually really like you're doing a real good job. So yeah, I think those are important things to kind of highlight. Um, and not to undermine them, but we are here not just to talk about them. We're here to talk about what you're doing now as well. Um, and so I was gonna, I think, just to kind of keep the conversation moving, what I would ask is like, so you did this and you kind of find yourself doing the PhD. You finished during the pandemic, and then you have to find this role, and you end up kind of at Dublin Zoo doing this kind of job now. I wondered like just for people who maybe haven't been, maybe aren't from kind of Dublin or the local area, or like have no awareness of Dublin Zoo as a place or an organization, could you introduce it a little bit? Tell them a little bit about yeah the zoo itself and maybe what it does more than what people I guess what people would think of when they think of zoo.
Yeah, of course. So the first thing I always tell people at Dublin Zoo, and that people don't realize, is that we're actually the fourth oldest zoo in the world. Um, After Paris, Vienna, and London, it's actually Dublin. So we were founded in 1831. So in 2031, we're actually going to be 200 years old, which is a huge achievement. And it's changed so much over those almost 200 years. Um, and I think if you come to Dublin Zoo today, the biggest thing that I think people take away from is just that we are a green space in the middle of Dublin. We have a horticulture team here at the zoo, and they've done an incredible job at creating a truly what I would say immersive experience for our visitors. We get over 1 million visitors a year normally, which is almost a quarter of the population of Ireland. Um, and they keep coming back to us year on year. So we have what I would say is like a huge social impact, and we have I would like to think that people like us within Ireland, that they can see that we're a place that actually cares about animals, animal welfare and conservation. Um, if you come as a zoologist or anyone interested in animals, I think you'll see that we have a lot of mammals at the zoo. So I think at the minute we have around 400 animals and around 70 different species. But we have all the big mammals here. Elephants are probably our biggest draw. We have five at the minute on site, and we've done an incredible job of breeding them over the last 20 years. Um, and I will say, from my perspective, obviously being in a conservation and research role, we have done quite a bit. Even before I came here, my predecessors before me did a fantastic job of building conservation partnerships with external organizations as well. So we've been supporting programs like the Golden Line Tamarin Association in Brazil for over 20 years now. So it's always been ingrained within Dublin Zoo that there is this kind of conservation role, and it's something that we're actually trying to develop more and more with my role here, obviously going forward.
I think that's I think that's really exciting, right? Because I think a lot of people come into a zoo setting, and they have no awareness of that the aspect of what a zoo does. They come and they come to see the animals, and they kind of come to learn something, maybe, but they don't expect that kind of conservation side in those outreach kind of projects all of the time. Which I always forget because I think I'm so ingrained in I love going to the zoo, and I've worked for RZSS and all these kind of organizations before, and so it's so in my mind of that's just what zoos do. But it's interesting that I think it's an important thing to remind people of, that they do more than perhaps what people first expect at first glance. um I mean, obviously you said you grew up going to the zoo. Was that something you were aware of before you got involved, and or was that something that only as you kind of got more and more involved did you realize, oh, there's actually so much going on here that is now your responsibility to look after, I guess? But did you know about how much that was going on at the zoo?
I think it's a bit of both. Like I knew some aspects of what was happening in terms of conservation at the zoo. The breadth and depth of them, I definitely wasn't aware of, and I think it's something that we as a community, not only just here at Dublin, across all zoos, need to be much better at. Is actually getting that conservation message out there, showcasing this is what we're actually doing, almost like shoving it down people's throats. You need to be really aggressive about it, I think, because as you said, most people come to the zoo and they're there for a nice day out, which obviously we can't get away from. That's why we're here for a lot of people, which is fine. They come and they financially support us in our conservation work. But I think we have a obligation to really get that conservation message across. And not only the conservation work that we're doing as an organization so that they can see and hear about all of that, but also to try and change their behavior and make them a little bit more pro conservation-y and pro wildlife friendly as well. I think there's lots of little things that we can ask our visitors to do on in their daily lives that will actually have an impact on conservation. And I think that's a really exciting area of zoo conservation and science that we're seeing more and more discussed. There's been some great work coming out of Australia on these kind of projects, and for us it's very exciting because, as I said, we've 25% of the Irish population coming back and back every year. That is an incredible captive audience to throw conservation messaging at and almost use as a living laboratory to try and test how we can better convey these conservation messages and change our visitors' behavior. So, yeah, there's a lot happening and it's very exciting around that.
And I guess that actually segues nicely into, I guess, talking more about what the zoo is actually doing, and the kind of conservation plan that is now being written. And yes, there were lots of pictures of you holding the kind of document that I've seen, and all these things. And I think it was really exciting because I saw it when it kind of first was published, and there was kind of the promo for it all happening. I remember looking at it and thinking there's a lot here, but it seems like all really important stuff. And looking through the just diversity of it all is all stuff. I'm this is amazing. It's really interesting, and I can't wait to learn more about it. Because I also want to I feel like it must be exciting but challenging, but all these things. And I don't know, could you tell the listeners, I guess, a little bit before we get into it, what is the action plan, and what is the kind of do the kind of, I guess, the promo that we've just talked about, the shoving down people's throats of this is what zoos should be doing.
Yeah, so the conservation master plan, well, that was launched in 2022, and basically when our director arrived in 2019, we created a new vision for the zoo, And that new vision is that by 2031, when we celebrate our bicentennial, we've undergone a paradigm shift from a zoo that supports conservation to a zoo-based conservation organization with conservation embedded into everything we do. So that's the kind of goal by 2031. And when I came along, I was tasked with the small little feat of creating a conservation master plan to make that a reality. So I went in knowing that we had to undergo this paradigm shift by 2031 and that we had a lot of ground to cover by that time. So really, I didn't reinvent the wheel in any way with that. What I did is I looked at zoos which I found to be really inspiring. And many of them had their own conservation plans, some of them didn't. But I tried to look at what was working for them in their particular context and how and if that could be translated to our context. Um, and in general, as I said, we have a lot of ground to cover by 2031, and I think that's reflected in the diversity of the Conservation Master Plan. Because I was looking at zoos like Chester Zoo, LA Zoo, Bristol Zoo, Zoos Victoria, these incredible, huge conservation NGOs in their own right. And in many ways, I was just like, wow, we have so much to do to reach that level. But also, it was a really good chance for me to learn, okay, this is achievable. This is what they've done so far, and this is how they've translated their work into actually tangible on the ground efforts. So all of that, it took me nearly a year to develop that, looking at all these master plans, working with the entire team here at Dublin Zoo to craft that and get approval and sign off and all of that. So we launched that at the end of 2022, and that's my roadmap now until 2031.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing, right? It's like learning from these things and not being disheartened from them, just realizing how, working out how to apply them to your context and what like those things like, understand it. Cause I think sometimes, it could be not disheartening, but like it could be like, oh, wow, we have a lot to do, or we have a lot to think about, or like, especially because, when you name drop probably some of the greatest zoos in the world that people all over the world know and love, that becomes like, oh, okay, how do we do what they're doing, how do we like learn from what they've done, and how do we apply it to our context? It must be like, okay, that's a challenge. But like, no, it's really really interesting. How did you even like, I feel like the process of that must have been, it took a year, but like, was it a lot of just like reading these documents, like reflecting? When you say you talked to everybody, like, was it having to get people on side? Was it having to were people coming to you with ideas? Like, how does that process of creating that work? I'm quite intrigued by that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of questions about that from other zoos who are looking at like, how did you do this? Like, we really like your plan. Like, where did you even begin? So I just sat down at the start and I was like, what is the role of the zoo? How should we contribute to conservation? And I created these rough headings. And then I went through all the other master plans I could find and was like, okay, does this fit into anywhere here? Does it work for us? And then at the end of that, I went through it again. I was like, okay, what are we still missing here? What can we do here at the zoo that isn't reflected in any of the action points from any other zoo? And I will say a lot of the stuff other zoos were doing, it was fantastic work, but it wasn't going to work for us or in our context. So it wasn't trying to copy exactly what they were doing. It really was just seeing how we can translate that for us. And I will say I was given incredible freedom to develop this master plan internally. But then I did obviously put the master plan to all departments in the zoo, from our marketing and retail team to our education team, to see how they thought they could fit in to the conservation master plan. Was there any areas for collaboration? And I think that's really reflected in the behavior change aspects of the conservation master plan now, because that really is a completely joint initiative between the conservation team here at the zoo and our discovery and learning team who run our education programs. And I think trying to think of conservation as very separate to those isn't going to work. So getting all of that buy-in very early on was really important. I think it reflects in the strength of the plan moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. Really, really interesting. And like, so I guess like, like it's interesting, right? Because it's like you've now you get the kind of their support, you get their kind of ideas, you kind of bring these things together and you start to think about them. And then as you say, it crosses all departments, it crosses all these kind of people's desks. How do you go about then going from this thing, right? That's like a document. That's one thing. It's hard enough to get to the document stage of like, this is it all written down. Like, how do you then take it and make it a reality? How is that kind of? I mean, 2022. We're now in 2024. You've had a year and a bit. That's quite it's not a long time to start to, I guess, create a huge but it's time to start getting the, I guess, wheels turning on the paradigm shift that kind of you wanted. Like, how do you? And I guess you're in that stage now, beginning to change these things. How do you begin to make those changes that like you set out to do?
To begin with, I think the easiest thing was looking at the kind of low hanging things that you can easily work on straight away. So one thing that we'd been starting even before the Conservation Master Plan was published was creating the new IUCN Centre for Species Survival here at the zoo. So that was something that we were going ahead with quite quickly, and it's one of the first things we actually managed to mark off from the plan. Um, but it was kind of building on those existing efforts that were already happening at the zoo. The same thing in terms of our conservation partnerships. We want to develop those as part of the conservation master plan, but many of them were already in place in some way or another. So it's just working with those partners to see how we can better support them. And a good example of that is Selma Kenyaki, which is a small NGO in northern Sulawesi, helping to protect the Sulawesi crested macaque. And since we've been supporting them for over 15 years now, but since the Conservation Master Plan has come out, we've deepened our support for them, both financially, but also in terms of technical support as well. So I actually got to go out and visit them this year and see all the work they were doing. So it wasn't starting from the ground with a lot of these things. It's building on the work we've already done. And some of it is starting from the ground up. And I think a good example of that is our internship program we launched here at the zoo last year. So it's a paid conservation science internship for 16 weeks for students. And for me, that was a really important step to slowly build over time, just in terms of not overwhelming us in terms of numbers of students coming in. So we launched that last year, and I think it was a success. The students seemed to love it. We got loads of incredible work done with them, including a peer-reviewed publication out of it. So it was just kind of, there's no right or wrong way to implement a conservation master plan. When we created it, we did create a tentative timeline, mainly for me to not get overwhelmed on day one after we published the plan. But a lot of it has just been building on an existing efforts, and also kind of existing momentum then that was coming from having the launch of the Conservation Master Plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And the way I wanted to applaud when you said the word paid internships, I was like, yes, because I feel like conservation sometimes, like I think sometimes we like see, especially for students and young people, it's like, oh, it's a hobby, it's a volunteer thing they can do. So when someone says paid, I'm like, yes, massive props to you for that, because that's fantastic. Because it's nice that you get to spend hours in a zoo unpaid, or it's nice you get to go out and do volunteering work occasionally. But yeah, especially for students and things, these paid opportunities I think are so important, so important.
Oh, incredibly rare. And we've just finished hiring for this year, so we're obviously continuing it this year as well. And we had over 200 applicants for two positions from the USA, the UK, like all over Europe, trying to get it because there's so few paid conservation science opportunities out there in zoos. And I can understand it. Obviously, zoos, a lot of them are charities and finances are limited, but it is a huge gap in trying to get people involved in conservation and deciding who can actually participate in conservation in zoos. So yeah, that was when I broached that idea of having this internship program. I was very clear from the outset that we could only do it if it was paid.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm quite proud of that actually.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. And I guess what's nice is that like students now 10-year plan, like there's in theory like they could be back working at the zoo, helping implement your plan, having been able to do that, and probably maybe only had an opportunity to get into the conservation kind of space because of the internship they did at Dublin Zoo. That's a really there's a nice storyline there. If hopefully one or two of them will come back and help you with that, that would be really exciting.
Potentially, the two we had last year were both incredible, and one of them is doing ecological consultancy now, and he's doing a lot of bat research, and the other one is already working in another zoo or aquarium. So they both ended up roughly in the field. So yeah, I think it worked well for them, and I think even just getting exposure to the inner workings of a zoo and getting to meet people within your country who are involved in that sphere is a really important opportunity for them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really exciting. That's really exciting. Um, I guess then, like, I feel like this is a big question, and I think this is quite a challenging question, probably to answer. But or actually, I'll ask it in a second, just to like set that one up. But then there's something I've just remembered that I wanted to ask more about, which was the IUCN Species Survival Commission kind of centre at Dublin Zoo. Like, in case people aren't aware of what that is or what that does, could you also just expand a little bit on that, and then I'll ask my challenging question afterwards.
Okay. Give me time to sweat.
Yeah.
So yeah, we launched in November 2023 the IUCN Centre for Species Survival Ireland, and that is an official partnership between Dublin Zoo and the IUCN Species Survival Commission. And with that, we also hired a full-time species survival officer to work and do all of the stuff that that centre needs to do. And basically, what that centre is trying to do is implement the IUCN's Assess, Plan, Act Network Communicate cycle for native Irish species. So it's looking at supporting species conservation assessment, so assessing where species fall on the IUCN Red List, developing conservation action plans for species, and also actually doing conservation action to help preserve species. And then obviously networking and communicating all of that. So I really view it as a kind of catalyzing and convening role. We're in the middle of Dublin. Like, most people who are involved in conservation come to Dublin quite frequently. So what I see it as is bringing people together and supporting other organizations who are already doing conservation work. We're not going to go out and reassess every species in Ireland on the IUCN Red List, but we do have the capacity to support those efforts and to bring people together who may currently be isolated or siloed. So we've been working on that over the last 6 months now, and it's gone really well. Um, and our new species survival officer has done incredible work so far. So we're still kind of finding our feet, but we've made some really good inroads so far with the government, especially. We were involved in the development of the recent National Biodiversity Action Plan for Ireland. So it's Ireland's fourth National Biodiversity Action Plan. And the actual Centre for Species Survival with IUCN is an action point in that National Biodiversity Action Plan, which is the first time it's ever been done anywhere in the world. And it's just been a phenomenal experience, bit of a whirlwind. And I think there's a little bit of pressure on us to deliver some great native species conservation efforts and planning and assessments, but we've only just begun. And I think there's so much potential with that going forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think what's nice is by linking that to kind of like, it's interesting, right? Because to link it not just to the government and get it into that kind of plan, but also to link it to the IUCN and a zoo, which provides an outreach space to not just learn about these animals and these native species, but also to then take that knowledge and reach, as you say, potentially up to a quarter of like the Irish population. Like that's a huge reach, like, and it's a nice like three almost like very important aspects all working in unison. It's like it sounds very exciting, very very exciting, like
Yeah,
really interesting.
that's reflected in the National Biodiversity Action Plan as well. Is that role as a kind of biodiversity and conservation communicator that the zoo has, and we do. If you come to the zoo, you can obviously see the Centre for Species Survival, and we have interpretation around the building explaining what's happening in the centre. And it's funny, our office is obviously in the centre, and you can see people outside reading the interpretation on how you assess a species and what conservation planning is. And it's really inspiring because you assume that people just walk by these signs, but no, people actually do care about native species conservation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I think there's a lot of like working with our ZSS. Sometimes, like, I sometimes get this thing of like people, because they do a lot of invertebrate like conservation in the Highlands of Scotland. Like, these are not necessarily endearing creatures to see right off the bat, right? When people come to a zoo or want like think about these things, they often like they want to see something big and fluffy, or penguins that are swimming around and all acting all funny or something. But like when you can sell them on the like native species that are maybe slightly less, like you would expect them to be slightly less like endeared by them, because they're a bit creepy sometimes if you've got a leech or you've got a fly or you've got, they can be a bit strange and a bit bizarre. But when you see people connecting with those, it's almost not more special, but there's like this little bit of like, oh, we've made somebody connect with not just with nature but with their home and with their like like it's like this nice extra like level to it. I think is really, really, really special. Yeah. I guess now I will stop you from sweating and ask the kind of challenging question, which I was going to ask, which is a big question with probably no simple answer. But I think like just to kind of like we've talked about this plan and how it's kind of begun and how these different things are going on, and like if you were to like at the end of it when it finishes in 2031, if you could envision what Dublin Zoo will be then, like what would it look like to somebody who visits then? Like what would be the difference? What would be something that's like exciting or changed, or something that in the kind of, but I suppose if it's a paradigm shift, it might just be everything and the way that the zoo you feel or learn, or like I don't know. This is why I'm asking, because it's a challenging question. And I'm like, yeah, what would the difference be, I guess, to you looking at the zoo then as to looking at the zoo when you started?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, in that it's everything. Even how you feel walking around the zoo, I would hope would be somewhat different. Um, if you've been to some of the bigger conservation focused zoos, I think the moment you step through that gate, you feel as though you are doing conservation work. By being there and supporting their efforts, you are supporting them save species. And that's what I want for our visitors when they come to see us, that the moment they step foot inside, they know that some of their donation has gone to conservation, that they can see that conservation work, and that it's not just funding someone halfway around the world, that it's actually protecting wildlife on their doorstep here in Ireland. And finally, then that they can actually participate in that in some way, that it's not a foreign concept that they're just learning about, it is their daily life that you're trying to touch base with. Um, so it's a complete overhaul, and I think it literally crosses every section of the zoo, from working with our retail team on conservation fundraising, to working with our animal care team on bringing greater taxonomic diversity to the zoo and showcasing Irish species, to the conservation science team to actually doing all the research and conservation action on the ground. So it literally is everything. And I think it's not even physically a lot of that stuff. A lot of it is internal and internal staff engagement as well, in that bringing everyone on this journey, that no, you're not working for a zoo, you're working for a conservation organization that just happens to run a zoo on the side almost. So yeah, it's everything but also nothing in a way.
I think that's, yeah, I asked a big question to which the answer is obviously also a very big answer, which, yeah, it makes it easier, I guess, to answer, because you could be like everything, but also more challenging because then you have to deliver on in 2031, I'll come back to you and be like, so did everything change? And see, like, there's a follow up conversation there. But no, I have complete, because looking at the plan, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of thinking, a lot of things to do, but a lot of stuff. I don't know. Clearly, a lot of thought has gone into it up until this point. So I think it'll be really exciting. And yeah, more justification, I think, for me to visit now, this year, maybe in the summer. I think definitely in the summer. Because then when I come back in 2031, I'll be able to be like, well, it's so different now. Look at me justifying my holidays.
I think as well, one way we're trying to look at this paradigm shift and the conservation master plan is, it's not as a static document, like it's evolving as the plan rolls out. We're learning what's working, what's not working, and we're adapting as we go. So none of it's written in stone. It's completely a living interactive document for the whole zoo to work with. um so yeah, I'm definitely not, I feel the pressure, but I'm also feeling the creativity and flexibility that comes with this incredible journey we're on and the incredible support we're getting for it, both internally and externally as well.
That's yeah, and I think that's really exciting and an important thing to highlight as well. Of like, yeah, like it's not, you don't necessarily have to, once you make a decision at one point in time, context and chime and what's going on in the world changes constantly. So yeah, flexibility, yeah, and also feedback from the public and feedback from this like different groups or charities you work with or stuff. I think is all like, yeah, because if we sit in these bubbles of go, oh, we've done this, that we've done that, we've done the next thing, without actually taking like feedback and thinking and responding, then it's like you don't necessarily get the best outcome, especially on a long term plan, I guess.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think like Dublin Zoo, nearly 200 years old, you don't survive 200 years without being flexible and adaptable as an organization. And we're continuing that kind of into our conservation work as well. So
Mm-hmm. No, that's exciting. That's really, really exciting. Um, I guess like it kind of leaves us in a nice place, I think, to kind of leave that kind of hopeful, like what's going to happen next kind of narrative, and move into a couple of other questions I had for you. But before we go, was there anything else you wanted to say about the plan? Any projects you wanted to highlight? Anything you were like, oh, I wish I had a chance to talk about this aspect of it and I haven't asked you about it? Or should I ask onto our next couple questions? Are you, what are you feeling?
no, we can park the conservation master plan. If anyone's interested in reading it, you can obviously find it on our website. It's a long document, but I think it's good. I like the idea of the journey we're on, and I think we're positioned in a very nice place to achieve that paradigm shift by 2031.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll put a link to it in the description of the episode. So if anyone's intrigued or kind of wants to go and look at it now while we're finishing our conversation or whatever, there'll be a link in the description of the episode so that you can go down and find it and browse through and read it and admire all of the lovely photography and all sorts of things that are in it, because it's a very pretty document alongside the rest of it, the important information.
On a quick aside, actually, I also designed it. I used to do all of the design of the actual master plan too. So the fact that you like how it looks is very important to me as well.
Look at that, an accidental compliment of like, yeah, I think excellent eye for design there. Fantastic. And I'm the type of person where like I everybody is like, my slideshows and things, I'm always like, I could be talking rubbish, but as long as this looks nice, I don't like this is what's the most important thing to me. So whenever I see someone with nice design, I'm like, yes, nailed it. Brilliant. I love it. I spend far too much time on Canva and all of these apps trying to make things look pretty. But yes, before we get to strategy design, the next question I was going to ask was to do with the fact that like this series is obviously coming out during Pride Month. It is an opportunity to kind of highlight kind of voices and experiences of people from across the conservation community, who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, and try and kind of celebrate those things, and also kind of make people out there know that the conservation space is for them and needs them and wants them, and trying to get as many people involved in conservation and have their voice heard as possible. And so the question I've been asking everybody this kind of series is that if there's somebody out there listening who thinks for whatever reason they don't belong in the conservation space, or the zoo, I guess in your case the zoo space, or whatever way you want to take it, what would your advice be, or what would you say to them to encourage them to be involved and tell them that they are wanted and needed and welcome here?
I think the biggest kind of thing for me with that is saying that the biodiversity crisis we are facing is
Mm-hmm.
so pressing and it is so global that we can't afford to exclude anyone from those conversations. The issues facing wildlife are also facing people as well. So things like climate change, um, changes in disease spread, all these things have human health impacts as well. So we can't afford to exclude anyone from these kind of conversations around conserving biodiversity, and helping the world, basically. Which it sounds very high level and Disney almost, but
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, it's true. And I think we see that a lot in conservation projects. We're seeing a lot of zoos really focus on that, in that the conservation work we do can't be done without working with local communities who live alongside wildlife. That's where all the work needs to happen, not necessarily protecting the species and its habitat itself. It's the communities who live alongside it. So conservation to me has always been a people problem, and we need as many people as we can to help solve that problem as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing, and it's there's something there's a richness added to that problem solving discussion and kind of work when there is as many people's voices in that discussion as possible, and the voices have, as we all have, different experiences and are able to share those experiences openly and honestly and able to kind of So I agree. I think it's a really important point, right? That like this impacts all of us everywhere, so we have to we have to make sure the space is welcoming and open and available to everybody. I think is really, really important. Really, really important.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a very separate question about making that space open and
Hmm.
accessible and
Yeah.
inviting and making sure people see themselves within that space and see career
Yeah.
roles for them. That's a huge area we as a community, I think, need to invest a lot more time and energy and resources into. That
Hmm.
we do some work in at the minute, but we could do a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, I think and it's like it's starting to open those doors. I guess with like bringing more young people in paid roles, kind of starting these conversations in ways that like bring voices that have been excluded from discussions previously, like in. And I think young people is one avenue into that, and there's other ways and other groups and other things that can be done to make the space more welcoming for other people. But yeah, I think that would be another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours of podcast to try and work out the solutions to all of those things. But like, yeah, I think it's good to see, I guess, in your case, the progress in terms of like young people and things, opening the doors to them and their voices and their experiences, I think is quite exciting and interesting.
Yeah, and that is something that we're working on here at the zoo. Our education team here work with schools from underprivileged areas to try and bring those students in where financially coming to zoo might be a significant economic barrier to them. So we work with them to bring those schools in and actually give them conservation education messaging and talk to them about the conservation work we're doing. And it's just about reaching those communities, not only around the world, but right on our doorstep as well, who have the potential and interest in conservation, but for one reason or another can't engage in that. So there's no right solution to it. I think we need to continue pushing ourselves within the community to be better and better. But I think any progress we make in this, we're seeing rewards returned instantly from it. So, and even from the internship program that we have here, I've seen incredible support from the interns, from external organizations, that it was an incredibly enriching experience for everybody involved. And hopefully it's happened to create conservationists.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's and I can't wait to see how it turns out. The more and more that come through and see where they go, I think that's really really exciting, really really exciting. Um, and I guess it kind of leads on to my final question. It doesn't really lead on to my final question at all. There's no segue there, but it's time for my final question, unfortunately, because we're running out of time. And I try my best to segue thing properly, but I don't think there is. I think that's just an interesting and inspiring message to leave on, and we'll go with the next question, which is my final question that I ask everybody. Obviously, Pangolin is a celebration of underappreciated stories, underappreciated species, and so, what I would ask you is, what is your favorite underappreciated species? If you could shine a spotlight onto anything, maybe something you have at the zoo, maybe something a native kind of Irish species, maybe something completely different that I'm not expecting, what would you shine the spotlight on and get people to think about?
Oh, that is a tough one. It has to be alive or can it be extinct?
We've never had an extinct one before, so you could be a trendsetter or you could stick with the
No,
group, whatever you want to do.
I don't think you're going to like it as a species because I feel like it's not underappreciated in some ways, but I'm a huge fan of large mammals, and the larger the species, the better generally. But one species I think is overlooked a lot is actually the grey whale.
Okay.
So people talk about whales a lot, and they often talk about like humpback whales or blue whales. And we have seen some incredible recoveries for those species since bans on whaling came into place. But the grey whale has been a fantastic species at looking how concerted conservation efforts can lead to huge population rebounds. Like the grey whale was once widespread across the Pacific and Atlantic. It was hunted to extinction in the Atlantic, unfortunately. But the population in the Pacific, and particularly along the US West Coast, has rebounded incredibly quickly. And it's a really true conservation success story of our time that I don't think people really talk about enough. And it's also a large mammal, so it ticks all the boxes, I think. But I think, no, for me, like you can see videos you can't do in the US, but in Baja, in Mexico, you can go out on boats and gray whales will come up to boats and interact with tourists and let you touch them. I'm not saying we should endorse that, but to go from a position where they were almost hunted to extinction to a point where they're reaching out for human contact and happy to engage with it is just such an incredible shift in such a short period of time that it gives me a little bit of hope for conservation in the future.
Hmm. And I think of all the whales you could have picked, like if you were about to say and not to say their conservation stories are less valid, but if you had picked like the orca, or you'd picked like a bottlenose dolphin or something kind of cetacean, like I'd be like, okay, there's an interesting point there to be made. But I feel like the grey whale is one that, yeah, I fully endorse. Is like, yeah, people don't know enough about it, and yes, go learn more about it, listeners, because that is, yeah, I think a great example of everything you were saying. No, that's fantastic. And I guess like that brings us, with all of that to do, go and read the plan, go and do these things, go and look up the grey whale, um, listeners. But I kind of guess that brings us to the end of our time today. And so I guess the last thing to do is just to say a huge thank you and give you the opportunity to say, is there anywhere, if people want to keep up to date with your work or Dublin Zoo's work or anything, where should they go to do those things?
Yeah, so check out Dublin Zoo's social media accounts, or I'll also share all the kind of conservation side of stuff that we're sharing, and my social media handles. I'm sure you can share them if you want at the end. But yeah, you can keep up to date on everything that's happening there. All of our new positions that we offer as they come available, they'll all be available there.
Perfect. And yes, I'll put all of whenever this episode comes out, all of those things will be tagged on social media. So if you go to our accounts, you'll find them, and they'll also be in the description of this episode. So you can find them down there now if you're intrigued as to what's going on. And yes, while you're on social media, follow us at Pangolin Podcast on everything. Subscribe to the podcast, do all those things. The classic spiel that I do every single time. Do those things. It would be very much appreciated. Leave us a nice review, all that sort of stuff. And I guess with all of that said, all that remains is to say a huge thank you to the listeners for tuning in. And of course, a huge thank you to you as well, Andrew, for your time and your insights. It's been a really brilliant conversation. And yeah, I'm in awe of all of the things and challenges you have set yourself, but I can't wait to see how they all turn out, because I think it's going to be fantastic. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and no pressure at all on us.
And on that note, until next time, thank you all again for listening, and goodbye.